Talk Radio Newsroom and powered by DemeraraWaves.com.
The news at this time comes to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratories. I am Deanna Jordan. A very good morning to you. First, the lead stories. The Attorney General is supporting calls by the Guyana Bar Association for the Constitution to be amended to end deadlock over the appointment of a Chancellor and Chief Justice. Guyana is working on getting COVID vaccines for young children. And news in the region. The CARICOM Secretary General says the removal of correspondent banking relationships can hurt the region. A former Colombian soldier has told a U.S. court that he played no role in the assassination of Haiti's President, Jovenel Moïse. And for the international news, we'll bring to you the latest bulletin from the BBC World Service. The details of these and other stories will be coming up in just a moment.
A COVID-19 PCR test is now mandatory for many routine activities, including travel and return to work purposes. At Eureka, our trained and experienced staff will ensure confidentiality while your test is conducted in a professional and timely manner with results in just 48 hours. So the next time you require an efficient and hassle-free PCR COVID-19 test, call 624-8378, 608-8378, or 623-7233 to schedule your appointment. You can also ask about our house call testing service.
And now the news in detail. The Guyana Elections Commission, GCOM, has informed House Speaker Mansour Nadir that Aubrey Norton and Valda Lawrence are now parliamentarians. Chief Election Officer Vishnu Prasad informed Mr. Nadir that this follows the selection of the names of Mr. Norton and Ms. Lawrence by the representative of the list. Mr. Prasad also informed the House Speaker that the GCOM chairman has been asked to issue certificates of election to Mr. Norton and Ms. Lawrence. When the National Assembly meets next week, Wednesday, Mr. Norton and Ms. Lawrence will take the oaths of a new member. Based on internal decisions taken by the People's National Congress Reform and a Partnership for National Unity, Mr. Norton is expected to be voted in by his parliamentarians to become Guyana's opposition leader. He will succeed Mr. Joseph Harmon, who has resigned from the National Assembly from March 15th. Mr. Norton says Ms. Lawrence will be responsible for finance in the opposition's shadow cabinet. Attorney General Anil Nandlal is backing calls by the Guyana Bar Association, GBA, for a change in the constitutional method for the appointment of a substantive Chancellor and Chief Justice. Since the Constitution was amended in 2011, successive opposition leaders have refused to approve the President's choices for a permanent Chancellor and Chief Justice. Noting that the constitutional reform process has started, he stayed clear of suggesting what the new formula should be, but stressed that every effort should be made to break the gridlock mechanism.
Here you have had deadlock now for 22 years, 2 decades. I don't think we need more lessons. We have 22 years of experience. So when we start the constitutional reform process, I hope we would be guided by these real examples and don't make fanciful recommendations, idealistic and unreal recommendations.
The Attorney General notes that the Constitution provides for the appointment of an acting Chancellor and Chief Justice if the opposition leader refuses to approve the President's nominees. Ahead of his expected emergence as opposition leader, Mr. Aubrey Norton said the coalition of a Partnership for National Unity plus Alliance for Change, APNU plus AFC, plans to file requests for information under the Access to Information ATI legislation. Mr. Norton says this is part of a plan to ensure there is accountability by the People's Progressive Party civic-led administration.
I do believe that we need to make more use of the Freedom of Information Act and begin to, through the Parliament, demand more information from this government, which seems to be obsessed with lack of transparency and lack of accountability. And we will have to take action to ensure that they understand the need to be more transparent and accountable.
He added that picketing and protests have not been ruled out. The Commissioner of Information is retired Justice Charles Ramson. There have been concerns that Guyanese at large, as well as media houses and specialized interest groups, have not been maximizing the use of the Commissioner of Information since the Access to Information Act was passed in 2011. Guyana is making efforts to obtain COVID vaccines for children 5 to 11 years old. Health Minister Dr. Frank Anthony made the announcement while receiving several ambulances, equipment to measure oxygen levels in persons, and mobile ultrasound machines.
We have been working with partners to make sure that we can get access to the vaccines for the age groups 11 to 5. So this is an ongoing discussion we are having, and we are hoping that we can conclude those soon so that we can get the vaccines for 11 to 5.
The health minister hopes that the vaccination rate among older children can increase.
Another area that we are working on is to make sure that the children between 12 to 17, that we can increase the vaccination rates, because for first dose we're just about 47% or 47.1%, I think it was, and that needs to be increased.
Health Minister Dr. Frank Anthony. Guyanese can once again travel to Japan, as that Asian nation has lifted its travel ban on 106 countries. Japan had imposed a ban several months ago at the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic. But today, the Japanese government said that from April 8, Guyanese and nationals from 105 other countries could once again travel to that country. They include 9 of the 15 member states of the Caribbean Community CARICOM, as well as neighboring Brazil and Venezuela. And now for news in the region. The leader of the Barbuda People's Movement, parliamentarian Trevor Walker, says that Prime Minister Gaston Brown is attempting to dilute the voting process on the sister island. At the weekend, Mr. Brown gleefully announced that Mr. Walker is on his way out since the Antiguans working on Barbuda will be registered there and will not be voting for Walker. However, the Barbuda People's Movement BPM leader says his party has been closely monitoring the voters list and the daily registration to ensure it is in keeping with the law. Based on the BPM's vigilance, Walker says the situation in Barbuda is quite normal at present, and he sees nothing to support the Prime Minister's claims. According to the law, legal residents are allowed to register to vote at age 18. However, to qualify to vote in any constituency, a person must be an ordinary resident in that constituency for 6 months. Based on this requirement, Walker says persons cannot just rent a house and then 2 months along decide to get registered to vote in that constituency. The Barbuda seat has proven difficult for the Antigua Labour Party over these years. While it captured the seat in 2014, when Arthur Nibbs ran on its ticket, he was unable to retain it in the elections of 2018. This time, Brown says he is confident that with Antiguans voting on Barbuda, Senator Nasintar Ned will ensure a Labour Party victory on the sister island. A former Colombian soldier pleaded not guilty on Monday to charges by U.S. prosecutors that he conspired to commit murder or kidnapping outside the United States in connection with the assassination of Haitian President Jovenel Moïse. The U.S. Justice Department in January said Mario Palacios was part of a plan initially designed to kidnap Moïse that evolved into an assassination plot after conspirators were unable to find a plane to take Moïse out of Haiti. Palacios' attorney, Alfredo Izaguirre, in a brief hearing in the United States District Court for the Southern District of Florida, entered the not guilty plea and later told reporters that Palacios was not aware of what was being planned. The lawyer says his client is simply a soldier who was taken from Colombia to Haiti, and the entire operation was orchestrated by other persons. Moïse was assassinated at his residence in Port-au-Prince on July 7, 2021. He was shot 12 times. Haiti's National Police says Palacios was part of a 5-man group known as the Delta Team that entered Moïse's bedroom to gun him down. The other 4 members of that group are in Haitian custody. The U.S. Justice Department says Palacios was detained in Jamaica in October and was being deported to Colombia in January when he agreed during a layover in Panama to travel to the United States instead. The United States has become increasingly involved in the Moïse murder investigation as a probe by the Caribbean nation's authorities stalls. Haitian-Chilean citizen Rodolphe Jar has been charged in the United States, and former Haitian Senator John Joel Joseph, who was arrested in Jamaica in January, may face extradition to the United States. The Secretary General of the Caribbean Community, CARICOM, Dr. Carla Barnett, on Wednesday warned that global rules against financial crimes can drive Caribbean businesses to the black market. A number of Caribbean countries have been blacklisted by the Financial Action Task Force because they have not done sufficient to counter money laundering, financing of terrorism, and tax evasion. But the CARICOM Secretary General says these changes need to be properly studied as they can force businesses to engage in unregulated practices.
The uncertainties and the actual loss of correspondent banking relations is likely to be driving legitimate business on the ground. When the formal financial markets cannot work, business resort to informal markets to survive.
Dr. Barnett says when banks in the Caribbean lose correspondent relationships with their counterparts in other parts of the world, businesses will prefer to keep their foreign exchange overseas. She says this can put greater strain on economies in the Caribbean.
The threat of loss of access to the international banking system can lead exporters of goods and services to keep as much of their foreign exchange earnings abroad as possible in order to be able to ensure ready access to foreign exchange when they need. This would have the effect of reducing the flow of export earnings into our economies. These 2 results of international de-risking practices, therefore, may well result in the expansion of the informal sector and increase the likelihood of macroeconomic instability, thereby increasing some of the very risks that we are seeking to mitigate.
The CARICOM Secretary General also told the opening of the Caribbean Regional Risk Conference that this can see the region losing some of its social and economic achievements. Hundreds of indigenous people began gathering in the Brazilian capital on Monday for a 10-day protest camp to defend their land rights and oppose a government bill in Congress that would allow mining and oil exploration on their reservations. Organizers are hoping to gather 7,000 people from 200 of Brazil's 305 tribes to press Congress not to pass legislation proposed by far-right President Jair Bolsonaro that would open their protected lands to commercial mining and agriculture. The head of Brazil's main indigenous umbrella organization, the Articulation of Indigenous Peoples, Sonia Guajajara, vows not to give up. Her organization represents most of Brazil's 900,000 indigenous people. Warriors in feathered headdresses with their bodies painted with the black and red dyes of Amazon fruit seeds danced, chanting ritual songs as they put up tents in the grassy esplanade next to government ministries in central Brasilia. Bolsonaro has said indigenous people have too much land holding up the development of the country and vowed not to recognize an inch more of reservation lands. Environmentalists say the reservations save the rainforest from destruction. Hundreds of indigenous people began gathering in the Brazilian capital on Monday for the 10-day protest camp to defend their land rights. And now for the international news, here's the latest bulletin from the BBC World Service.
Hello, I'm Debbie Russ with the BBC News. Ukraine's foreign minister has again urged Western countries to provide his country with more weapons to fight Russian forces. Dmytro Kuleba was speaking in Brussels ahead of a meeting of NATO foreign ministers. Nick Beak is in Brussels.
Ukraine's foreign minister, Dmytro Kuleba, said his agenda today was weapons, weapons and weapons. He called on NATO allies to give his country everything it was asking for because, he argued, weapons served the purpose of peace. But I asked him how he would react when Western ministers tell him they won't send some equipment for fear of sparking a wider war with Russia.
I think the deal that Ukraine is offering is fair. You give us weapons, we sacrifice our lives, and the war is contained in Ukraine. This is it.
The NATO Secretary-General said allies would discuss providing different types of support, but he has warned the conflict could drag on for years and that President Putin has not given up his ambition to seize all of Ukraine.
There's been further Russian shelling of towns and cities in eastern Ukraine overnight in the regions of Kharkiv, Luhansk and Donetsk. The Ukrainian authorities have repeated calls to evacuate, in the words of the governor of Luhansk, to save themselves from Russian death. Ukraine has accused Hungary of helping President Putin continue his aggression against Ukraine. Ukraine's foreign ministry said Budapest was reluctant to acknowledge Russian responsibility for atrocities in towns like Bucha. Danny Eberhardt reports.
Ukraine's relations with Hungary, frequently strained, are deteriorating fast. Hungary's recently re-elected Prime Minister Viktor Orban has always cultivated close relations with Vladimir Putin, far too close for Kyiv. Hungary has backed EU sanctions thus far and has welcomed many Ukrainian refugees. But Mr Orban has refused requests to supply Kyiv with weapons and opposes calls for an embargo on oil and gas. Ukraine is angered that Mr Orban says he's prepared to pay for gas in rubles, accusing him of undermining EU unity.
A court in Turkey has confirmed that the trial of 26 suspects linked to the killing of the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi will be moved to the Saudi capital, Riyadh. Sebastian Usher reports.
The trial in Turkey has been going on for 2 years, with all defendants in absentia. It's been seen by those demanding justice over the brutal murder of Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in 2018 as a means of achieving some accountability. The Turkish government originally led the campaign against the Saudis, and in particular Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who's widely perceived as being implicated in the killing, despite his denials. Back then, relations between Turkey and Saudi Arabia were hostile, but that has changed, with Ankara keen to rebuild bridges in the region to help its faltering economy.
World News from the BBC. The president of the internationally recognised government of Yemen, Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi, has handed over his powers to a new presidential council and sacked the vice president. President Hadi said the new body would carry out political, military and security duties during what he described as a transitional period. The move comes as a 2-month ceasefire between the warring parties in Yemen is still in its first week. The authorities in China's economic hub Shanghai, which is under an extended COVID lockdown, are reopening some wholesale markets and grocery stores to tackle public frustration over food availability. Shanghai registered 20,000 new cases of COVID-19 on Wednesday, 98% of which were asymptomatic. Here's Celia Hatton.
After 11 days of harsh regulations preventing most people in Shanghai from leaving their homes, Chinese social media platforms are brimming with frustrated accounts from those who were struggling to acquire food, drinking water, and other necessities. Food delivery apps are overwhelmed, and some have taken to standing at their windows calling for food. In a rare recognition of public concerns, Shanghai's deputy mayor, Chen Tong, told reporters the authorities would allow more delivery workers to come out of lockdown.
The Federal High Court in Nigeria has ordered the government to appoint women to at least 35% of jobs in the public sector. The judge said he agreed with the plaintiff that it could not be possible that out of 70 million women in the country, there were not enough competent females to fill 35% of government roles. Australia's largest city, Sydney, has received more than an average month's worth of rainfall in one day. Torrential downpours prompted flash flooding. Evacuation orders have been issued in areas where homes are threatened by rising river levels. Residents in the city of 5 million have been told to avoid unnecessary travel. BBC News.
The news was brought to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratories.
Don't let the fear of contracting the coronavirus disease deter you from seeking the medical care you need. At Eureka Labs, we ensure the safety of our clients and staff with our rigid sanitization routine. This involves the use of ultraviolet lights to effectively rid the air and all surfaces of viruses and bacteria that may be present throughout the lab daily. The light works to rapidly inactivate microorganisms through a physical process that is invisible to human eye. So the next time you need a checkup, don't hesitate to give us a call on 225-7574 to schedule your appointment.
And now to end the news, here is a recap of the leads. The Attorney General is supporting calls by the Guyana Bar Association for the Constitution to be amended to end deadlock over the appointment of a Chancellor and Chief Justice. Guyana is working on getting COVID vaccines for young children. And news in the region. The CARICOM Secretary General says the removal of correspondent banking relationships can hurt the region. And a former Colombian soldier has told a U.S. court that he played no role in the assassination of Haiti's President Jovenel Moïse. And that's the end of the news.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.